I'm going to move you guys over here. Okay. Great. Welcome to this afternoon's CPPA call. I am deviating from our normally scheduled risk code review that we've been doing over the past year. And reason being is because this is our last CPPA call of fiscal year 22. And there's lots of new CPPAs that have joined since we started doing our risk code review. And with all of the new employee trainings that have been going on or that will be going on over the next couple of months, we also recognize that new employee training does not cover all the scope of what it means to be a nutritionist, nutrition counselor in the WIC program. So we figured it'd be good to take one of our CPPA calls to review just some of the basics of the position and what some of the expectations are. So we will go ahead and move on to the agenda. And I'm going to pause one more time because I still think some staff are having issues coming into the meeting invite. And I just want to make sure that I'm not getting any messages on the back end here. And we look okay. Okay. And Trinita, I'm going to go ahead and mute you because I think I've got some feedback that's coming in. But thanks for joining. All right. Okay, so our agenda for today, you guys, we are going to move through some announcements that we've got here at the state agency. And also we're going to request some of your feedback. And as I said, for our training today, I'm basically going to show us how the nutrition care process is implemented, laid out in your day-to-day work that you do with participants. So we'll take it slow. We'll go through each of those steps and link it back to what that looks like to do nutrition care process in WIC. Then we're going to talk through TGIF notes, their importance, review food packages, but not in the contents of it, but more so outlining when you should use each of the different types of food packages, and then sort of what's appropriate for the scope of a CPPA, and then what should be sort of the actions or referrals to a CPA to do when it comes to food packages. And then we're going to wrap up with breastfeeding in WIC. And I am right here. Here we are. Okay. Starting with our announcements, first one on here is the CPPA surveys. So in September, you guys are going to receive a SurveyMonkey link that basically just asks for your feedback in regards to the position, to support, like how well you feel supported in your role as a CPPA. And that's also an opportunity to identify if there's any training needs, additional support, feedback, things like that. To help support you again in your role as a nutritionist in the WIC program. And if you guys can recall, we sort of started this CPPA initiative a couple years back, and we started with the expanded scope of practice for CPPAs last summer, which is when we started reviewing more of the risk codes that you guys were now given authorization to counsel on. So part of the CPPA survey is to help close out that initiative. And again, it's just a good time too, because we do have so many CPPAs that have come on board for you guys just to provide your feedback and how you guys are feeling in regards to your support in this role. Other announcements that we've got here. We've been getting more calls about just basically participants having confusion around their benefits list or not knowing what they're allowed to purchase and not allowed to purchase. And we realize there's a lot of factors that go into it, but we think one of the ones that are confusing, one of the items that's confusing to participants are these store shelf tags. So store shelf tags are now optional for our authorized WIC stores, which means they don't have to have them out. They don't have to label all of the WIC food items. And that can be confusing for participants because some stores they go to, they might see them and other ones they may not. But really, I think the point that we would like you to reiterate with participants is that if they see a store shelf tag, that doesn't mean that that's necessarily an item that they can purchase with their WIC card, right? It's got to be an item that is on their family summary balance, an item that they've been issued. So if they see that like whole milk has these store shelf tags, but of course we've only given them 1% milk or soy milk or something else. Like, you know, they might just get confused because they see these shelf tags thinking that they can get the item, but no, it's got to be, you know, it's got to be something that they've been given on their EWIC card. So just some education around that would be helpful for us, you know, and I understand we're a team here, so we're also doing our part too whenever we come in contact with our participants. Okay. And then the next item here is the participant benefit list. So this sort of feeds into the store shelf tags. And that is just, I think this one might still be a bit confusing for participants when it comes to like the units of measure that they see on their list or in the app. And then just being familiar with some of the abbreviations too that they're having to use to go shopping with. So again, just another point to reiterate, you know, when we're going through and printing off that participant benefit list, you know, to stop and pause and ask if they have any questions, if there's any items on there that they don't understand, or if we need to explain more. I even had just yesterday when I was answering calls, I had a mom call and she's like, I don't understand what this 1 ounce of cheese is. And I said, oh, you mean the 1 pound of cheese or the 16 ounces? And so we talked a little bit more about that. And then also too, how she would be able to use those benefits. And so I understand there's a big learning curve when it comes to these different units of measure. And, you know, the different components that go into a participant actually being able to use their benefits. So that's just another plug for us and for you guys in the clinic, you know, once we're printing these things out, just to pause and ask if the participant does have any questions at that point, you know, to make their shopping experience a little bit easier. And now this is where I pause because I always feel silly just giving you guys items to reiterate or points to bring up with participants. And I wanted to pause and ask, like, what sort of questions you guys have been getting from participants, particularly as it relates to like the shopping experience. Like, are there certain points that keep coming up that you hear about, or is there anything that you might want to share with the group or share with us? Like, I'm going to allow this time and space to ask that. Because your feedback is actually very helpful for us to know like how we can better serve our participants. So I'm going to pause and yeah, feel free to unmute yourself if you have anything to share about what your experience has been in helping participants with benefits or even just communicating their benefit list to them. And if we have nothing, then I will move on. Okay. With that though, feel free at any point, like if anything comes to mind after this call or whatever it may be, just to reach out to our vendor team. And I know those who attended our new hire training last week, you became familiar with the different members on the vendor team, or myself, since I'm the one talking and going over these points today. Always feel free to send me an email if anything comes up, and I'll make sure that that gets sent off to the right person. Okay. The other item that we have on here, hopefully you guys are aware of this, but the Abbott flexibilities have been extended, which basically means those formulas like Infamil brand, Gerber brand, we're allowed to continue issuing those onto participants' benefits through the end of October. Okay. With that, though, I just want to put in a plug that we know that Similac products are becoming more and more available on the store shelves. It's actually probably in a lot of cases easier for participants to find Similac as it is to maybe these Infamil or these Gerbers or, you know, these formulas that they've been on the last couple of months. So although we've been given that extended flexibility, I am going to push and recommend that we start getting our participants back onto Similac products as much as possible. Because the truth is, at some point, these Abbott flexibilities will come to an end, and I don't want it to be like a hard stop up front, you know, for our mommies that then have to switch back the formula. If we can give them some guidance and some time to make that transition back over. But yeah, just to be aware of that. And I also, and I'm going to call on Courtney if she's listening. I also think October is the month that we go back down to our normal CVB values. Is that right? The $9 and the $11?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm in hands right now extending the formula options food packages to October 1st. Or sorry, October 31st. And then, but the other food packages will all change to reflect the previous CVB amounts. So like children will go back to $9 and women will go back to whatever small amount it was before. That's not enough.
Agreed. Agreed. So there's also that anticipatory guidance to give to them too, that they're going to see these value change on their benefit list come October. And that's because, right, like we don't have authorization to continue with those higher amounts past September. So just be aware of that too. I'm going to circle back up to the participant benefit list. That is something to point out to them when we're printing this off, or even showing them their benefit. Well, no, because you can only see one with the benefits on their app at a time. But when they have that paper copy, that they are going to notice in future months that that value is going to go back down to what it was before. Okay. So with that, we're going to jump into our CPPA training. As I said, we're going to talk through the nutrition care process. So the nutrition care process has 5 elements to it, 5 points, 5 steps. There's assessment, there's diagnosis, there's intervention, and a lot of times we kind of group these last 2 together, which is monitoring and evaluation. And like I said, the point of this today is to link it back to how you guys are doing each of these 5 steps in your role as a WIC nutritionist, day in and day out as we're doing certifications with participants. I'm also going to pause here too, because I'm dubbing this a CPPA training, but I know that I cannot go into full detail like I want to in this hour and a half call. So 2 things I want to point out for those who came to the new employee training last Thursday. Some of these items are going to be repeated, and for that already up front, I'm going to just not apologize, because I do think reinforcement is important when it comes to learning, but just give you the heads up that you're going to see some graphics and some points that we talked about last Thursday. And the other point I want to make too before we really dive into this is that in the future, CPPA training is going to be more extensive and given a lot more time than just this hour and a half call that we've got going on today. So consider this to be sort of an overview of the different components, and that I'm not going to be able to do all of the elements and all the pieces here that I want. It's full justice, but that within the coming months, as we roll out our new employee curriculum trainings, we will cover a lot more of these topics in more detail. Okay, so we're back. We're back, and we're going to start with step number 1, which is the assessment component of this. Okay. The nutrition assessment, it is the basis of all that we do. Our assessment and everything that follows underneath of it is going to guide the rest of our actions, our recommendations, our next steps with our participants. And if I'm honest, there's lots of components and there's lots of skills that go into conducting an effective nutrition assessment. And if you guys recall, for those who have been around already for a couple of months, our all-staff training that we had in June, Dr. Manuel spent like an hour and a half just on this part alone, like talking about how to do a nutrition assessment and how to do it well. And I don't have that amount of time. So again, there's lots of words that are like going to pop up here that I'm just going to introduce topics to you, talk about in a little bit of detail. But as I said, we're going to go into more detail, more trainings on this at a later time. So the first words that I want to point out here is the Value Enhanced Nutrition Assessment, which is VENA. VENA is the approach that all WIC agencies, all of their nutritionists, their staff that do nutrition assessments, this is the approach that we use with our participants to do the nutrition assessment, to guide our interactions with them. So we're going to talk about VENA actually in a little bit more detail and its components, but what I also want to talk about too are sort of the fundamental. So if VENA is the approach, then these little gears that you see over here that I came up with, these are sort of the different elements or the things to be mindful of that go into doing an effective nutrition assessment, okay? And it's all pieces of information that we have to collect there's the words. Nutrition screening, nutrition assessment, and lab anthropometric data are points and information that we need to collect, and we use the VINA approach to assess it and then communicate sort of our findings and guiding our nutrition counseling with our participants. Cool. Okay. So my little gears here. So basically what I want to point out is that nutrition screening is a component of the nutrition assessment, but it's also a little bit separate. Nutrition screening is your, I call them sort of like your closed-ended questions. They're sort of the foot that you lead off of. They're like pieces of information that you're going to gather no matter what. And some of this is because in hands, these are questions that you have to answer. So think about like, how many prenatal visits have you had? What's the expected due date? What was baby's supposed to be due date? Like to find out whether or not they were premature. Do you smoke? Yes. Do you, like yes or no sort of questions. So that's sort of nutrition screening. They're the ones that you're definitely going to make sure that you ask. May not always be open-ended questions and may not also be like points that we sort of, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like they're closed questions that then we need those responses to go into our nutrition assessment. But before I talk about nutrition assessment, I'm going to talk about lab and anthropometric data because this is another critical component too. You guys know here at WIC that we take heights, we take weights, we take hemoglobin measurements, and we use all of this. We chart it, and we can look at growth trends. We can look at where their percentiles are today. That is a very important component that we also use in addition to our questions that we got from nutrition screening that go into our nutrition assessment. Okay, so nutrition assessment, in addition to screening and lab anthropometric data, it becomes way more dynamic. It's a back and forth process with the participant. And this, to me, the nutrition assessment is where you're going to be using a lot more of your open-ended questions and those counseling skills that we talk about, affirmations, open-ended questions, rolling with resistance, all of those sort of things. Like we take all of this information together, and coming up in 2 slides is actually a way better graphic to explain this, so I might be getting ahead of myself. But basically, the assessment components here all are going to drive into leading us to a nutrition diagnosis, which is step 2 in the nutrition care process, but we're not there yet. We're going to actually go back here now that we sort of have an understanding of the different components of what goes into the nutrition assessment. I need to talk a little bit more about VINA down here and the VINA approach that we use. Okay. So VINA goals, the value enhanced nutrition assessment, it's got 2 main parts to it. All right. And I'm going to pause because I want you guys to really remember both of these components here because this is like what makes VINA. It needs to be participant centered. Like that is our approach to participants. Participant centered, here's some points here. You're going to honor their autonomy as a participant. You're going to promote optimism, internal motivation, create non-judgmental environment, and empowerment. Okay, so you're affirming the participant. You can be participant-centered without being health outcome-based, okay? I know you guys have had these mommies, family members that come in, and the thing that they want to talk about during their WIC appointment is not health outcome-based, right? Like, oh, I was supposed to get a ride to the store last week, but my ride canceled on me, and I'm not mad at my cousin's boyfriend because promised he would show up at so-and-so time, and it's like sometimes those sort of conversations, those are important, and we need to be present for the participant and hear their concerns. But the goal of VINA is not just to be participant-centered, but to drive them into health outcome-based, right? So I always say that like the participants' concerns and goals, whatever is in front of them today, we have to acknowledge it. And as you grow in your skills as a nutrition counselor, you're going to learn that no matter what sort of situation is in front of you, you got to learn how to sort of steer that person back to getting them back on track, getting them into a health outcome based, at least you're going to say these words. You don't need to say those words to the participant. You're going to get them there. Okay. So if I had a mommy who was concerned today about transportation, she wasn't able to go to the store, she wasn't able to pick up her baby's formula or get her foods or whatever, like acknowledge that that's a hard thing, okay? Just be like, I know, that's frustrating. And it sounds like you really are concerned about not being able to get your benefits. what would I say after that? I'd say talk to me more. Like, what stores do you go to? Did you know that we have corner stores that are authorized, that you may not have to go to a big store? They carry the same sort of WIC food items. Let's talk about your WIC benefit list. You see, and you start taking those little steps to get them back, sort of back into WIC, back for the reason that they're there in front of you today. So we got to do both. We have to be participant centered. We have to be health outcome based. So health outcome based is positive health outcomes while acknowledging that these other areas of life that they influence health, because they most certainly do. And this table down here, sorry if it's hard to read, it wasn't the point of the VINA goals, but it is an illustration that they include in our VINA guidance. And basically it's just examples with each of these participant categories on like what a desired health outcome is or should be, or like what we should be thinking about when setting goals with our participants. So like pregnant women, we want them to have healthy, full-term babies while maintaining optimal health status. For women who are breastfeeding, we want them to optimal health status during their childbearing years and reduce the risk of chronic disease, and probably also be successful in their breastfeeding journeys. I would add that in there. For non-breastfeeding postpartum women, achieve optimal health status. This is I'm not going to read through the rest of this because these are very, very general. Anyways, you guys sort of get the point. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to repeat them again, because when we talk about VINA, this is like instantly what I want to come to mind, is that it is participant centered and it is health outcome based. Gotta have both. Gotta have both. Okay. And also, and I didn't go through this example, but if you're just health outcome based and you're not participant centered, that's no justice to anybody. Okay. Participant centered really is what helps to build rapport with a participant. If mom's coming and talking to you and telling you about her day and what's happened, and you just have no concern because you're just so focused on like getting through those nutrition questions or trying to set her a goal or get her participants list off, like that's not what we're about. Okay, I'm back. So participant-centered and health outcome-based. Those are the goals of VINA. All right, and this is where I'm definitely going to take some shortcuts here because I just don't have all the time that I would like to go through the different components of the nutrition assessment. But when you're using the VINA approach, these really are like the six. This is like how they summarize the 6 different steps, and it's very similar to like the nutrition care process, but I felt like it was worth including here to sort of tie these all together. Okay, and also too, because some of the steps that are in the VINA approach are not necessarily components that we think about in the nutrition care process, but they are there. So like the first one here is set the agenda, which basically is just setting the expectations for the appointment today. I find that this is so helpful, especially when you've got families that come in and they're in a rush, or they, and it's their first time in WIC and they have no idea what to expect. Like, how long is this going to take? And kind of like letting them know up front what's going to happen. And if you're checking hemoglobin too, like, I'm sure you guys have had participants like this. Like, some people get very anxious about having to have either their weight checked or having to like, if you tell them you're going to take like literally a little finger prick and there's going to be blood, some people need to be prepared for that up front. So that's sort of step 1 in the whole VINA approach, is just letting them know what to expect for today's appointment, and to the best of your abilities too, kind of giving them sort of like a time reference, especially if it's their first time. If you're explaining WIC benefits, printing all of this off, like it's obviously going to take a little bit longer than say a mom who's coming in for sub-certifications for children that she's already had in WIC. So just be open and honest about it, about how much time it's going to take and what's going to occur during the appointment. Okay. Steps 2 and steps 3, they go back and forth with each other. You need to collect relevant information. So that's where we go back to that gears picture. You're doing your nutrition screening, you're doing your lab and anthropometrics, and you're doing your nutrition assessment. Okay, you're gathering all this information. But you also, along the way, you have to clarify and you have to synthesize, okay? And the best example I could come up when I was thinking about this is like, have you guys ever had a caregiver tell you, oh, the child's got an egg allergy or a peanut allergy? And you're like, oh, okay, noted. And then later on, when you start talking about some of their favorite foods, they'll tell you like, oh, scrambled eggs or hard-boiled eggs. And you're like, what? And it's like, oh, they're only allergic to scrambled eggs, or they're only allergic to peanut butter, but they can have peanut butter cookies. So like sometimes you really have to pause, look at all the pieces of information in front of you and say, hold on, I need you to clarify a little bit more. And then ask, like, has the allergy been diagnosed? And if so, how severe and how long ago was the diagnosis? And they need to follow up with like their doctor because of it more frequently. Anyways, you guys are sort of getting the picture here that like, as you're collecting the information, you need to also have that skill of being able to clarify that information that's being shared and then synthesizing it, because ultimately that's going to help guide you to step number 4, guide nutrition services. So guiding nutrition services, this is me also sort of getting ahead of myself, but this is where like in the nutrition care process, the diagnosis and the intervention come into play. And we're going to talk more about those on the other slide, so I'll just go ahead and mention it here. Step 5 is document the assessment. If you guys recall earlier on our agenda, we're going to talk about TGIF notes and they're important, so I'm not going to go into that too much at this point. And then step number 6 is conducting the follow-up. All important, all components, and we're going to talk about conducting follow-up also on the following slide, so no need to spend additional time here on that. Okay, so we've gotten through assessment in a quick abbreviated way, but that takes us on to the diagnosis. So here we see it again in being participant-centered. We are also health outcome-based, and the reason why I need to reiterate that here is because all of our diagnoses, nutrition risk diagnoses that we put down here are based on health outcomes. And so, right, so part of these you guys already know. There's 5 main categories that our nutrition risks fall into. It's anthropometric, biochemical, clinical, dietary, and environmental. I put our ABCDE guide up here for reference. I know you guys are very familiar with this. And I include it for a couple of reasons. One, because, right, like we're familiar with the colors. It's going to be the same that you guys see in HANS. I know that HANS has been very helpful too in being able to categorize the different risks and where they fall. In particular, I like this form too because it incorporates both of those screening questions, which I call sort of our closed-end questions, and then our nutrition assessment questions, those open-ended questions. And it's always a great tool to start with until you become comfortable in your counseling abilities, as a way to start and open up those conversations for your diagnosis, for your nutrition counseling, your intervention. Okay. Okay. You really can't talk about our nutrition risk diagnoses without also mentioning some of the resources you guys have at hand to help you in determining when they can be assigned and like when it's appropriate. So first and foremost here, we got a picture of our DC WIC nutrition risk criteria. That has been updated within the past year. So, and that always stays up to date. And that's really where you're going to get the bulk of your information. So that's always going to be like resource number 1 that I'm going to point everybody back to. And it's because it's got everything there. It's got the categories where these risks are going to be appropriate for assigning. It also goes through the justification, like why we include these as part of our WIC nutrition risk and diagnoses that we then counsel our participants on. And then it gives you like points to consider and things to discuss with the participant. And I wish I had an example pulled up, and I might just pull one off the top of my head. And I will, pica. So I'm going to just use an example here. Pica is, it is the compulsive eating of non-food items. It is common, especially with those that we serve here in WIC, pregnant women, infants, and children. Well, maybe not so much infants, maybe older infants and children. It's thought to be linked in part to nutrient deficiencies. And so, and it's got nutritional implications, right? So the reason why that's one of the risks here and how the nutrition risk criteria book can be helpful for us is because we know that it's a risk that can be assigned to all participant categories. It goes through some of the more common non-food item cravings. Think like dirt and cornstarch. Ice is included there, and a lot of times people don't think of ice as as one of those items that would be considered pica, but like technically it is. Laundry detergent, hard clay, things like that. And the nutrition risk manual is helpful because it talks about how to then counsel and what sort of referrals, that's the other one too, referrals that you can make for someone who has this nutrition risk diagnosis. So lots of good points and information to go there. And you guys know too, what we've normally been doing during these CPPA calls is going through nutrition risk and and the whole different components to it. And there's plenty of resources also available on dcwic.org to help you in addition to our DC risk nutrition risk criteria. Okay, so we have that. That's the whole book. It's a long document, but again, it goes through all of our risk codes. What some staff do find more helpful are the cheat sheets that we came up with. So the cheat sheets have also been updated within the past year. They break down risk codes, so it's only going to include those risk codes, that are appropriate for CPPAs to assign. And it has, what do I want to say? Just like the main points, as a brief description of the risk code and when you would assign it. So it's definitely easier to keep at your desk and have as like a reference material. It's not going to have as much material as a nutrition risk criteria book, but it's very helpful. So, and that can also be found on dcwic.org. In addition, I can send out links to these as well. The Arizona WIC program came up with like two rounds of risk code education videos. They released one set in 2018 and another set in 2020. It's another great resource. So we actually used a lot of those education videos last summer when we began counseling, or when we began doing training on the expanded CPPA scope of practice. But we definitely didn't cover all of those videos. So it's also a great tool to, I know with all the free time that you guys have, to go and watch some of these videos. But I just want you to be aware of them and know that they exist, and can also be something that I send in a follow-up email after this call today. Okay, we are moving right along. So we've covered assessment, we've covered diagnosis, and now we are on to the intervention. And the intervention is where a lot of those kind of nutrition counseling skills come back into play. So what are the main points here when we're using the VINA approach is to prioritize your counseling messages. Right? We know that participants can have lots and lots of risk codes, and it's really up to you and your skills and your professional judgment and assessment to know, like, what are the ones that I need to highlight and I need to talk to this participant about today, considering a couple of things, like what is the participant interested in? How much time do I have? And how do I make sure that I convey this information in a way that is not like overloading the participant and all the other things that they are going to have to be shared with today. So many skills that go into the intervention of this. And again, I'm going to have to apologize for the amount of time that I have to go through these slides. We will expand on how to do this and do it effectively at a later time. Okay, so know how to prioritize your counseling with the participant. Other points here when you're doing your intervention is just be sure that the information that you're sharing is accurate. I feel like I have been guilty of this. I don't know. It's just best to give a disclaimer. Like if you're just not 100% sure or confident in your responses, like be transparent about that. And it's also okay to say that you don't know. Part of the intervention is that it's a conversation. So you might be asked questions or things that you're just not as comfortable with. And that is okay. If you guys, well, actually, I'm going to do this for you anyway, is I will send you some of the resources and places that we pull our nutrition counseling messages from, like the American Academy of Pediatrics and the CDC, My Plate messages, things like that. Like those are going to be your points that you go to find like trusted information and resources for participants and whatever sort of messaging and counseling that you're providing. Okay, so we are making sure that the information that we're sharing is accurate and individualized services. This is where we go back to being participant-centered and health outcome-based, and we're not leaving out one without the other. Okay, so individualized services, this also sort of plays into the referrals and follow-up that's going to be needed. Like if we're making certain recommendations for our participants, but we know that some of this isn't all that feasible. Let's take the example of the CVB bump going back down to the $9 and $11 each month, and we're recommending that mom, family, and, include more fruits and veggies at every meal. Like if that's a goal that we're setting and they're like, okay, but you're about to take away all of my CVB. How am I supposed to do that? Then we need to make appropriate referrals and individualize, that service to them. So different programs that we have in DC, SNAP, if they do not already have SNAP, it might be eligible, would be another good referral. We'll talk more about referrals on the other slides, but anyways, it comes up here in our intervention because it's something to be mindful at this point as well. And I sort of already talked about this here, but it's an efficient use of time. Yeah, I think it just comes with practice, and especially as you get good at familiarizing yourself with resources that are available and prioritizing your counseling messages, the efficiency of time will come as well. Okay. I also do not have, I'm going to keep saying this on every slide. I do not have the time to go through all of the counseling methods that we use and the skills that we want you guys to incorporate and build on in the way that you conduct nutrition counseling. So I'm just going to kind of go through the words on this slide. And like I said, we will talk more about behavior change and the stages of behavioral change at a later time. Okay. We talk a lot about motivational interviewing. So it's designed to explore and enhance an individual's internal motivations. Motivational interviewing incorporates those ORs, which is open-ended questions, affirmations. What's the R?
Reflection.
Thank you. Reflection. Thank you. Okay, so thank you. Those are all the points that go into motivational interviewing, and we'll go into more of them at a later time. Appreciative inquiry, focus on building confidence by drawing out positive feelings related to what went well in the past, what is going to go well in the present, and what the family wants in the future. Emotions-based counseling. So this is important. It's really, as we're making recommendations and talking to the participants to understand the emotions behind it, how they're feeling, how ready that they're feeling, but also like, there's a lot that goes into it, right? Like we may make, okay, let me read this. Taps into how an individual feels about a given topic. It recognizes that while information and facts are important, emotions are more frequently the driver behind change, right? I've had an example of this where mom is concerned about her child's weight and grandmother's not, and the grandmother's the one who watches the son, watches her grandson while mom's at work 4 days during the week. And so there's a lot to consider there, because if mom's not in control of what her kid is eating, 8 meals out of the week, lunch and snacks and breakfast or whatever else, like there's a lot of emotions that came about, and the fact that she's not being heard, she's not being trusted by her mother, and what she feels is something important for her child's health. And so that was an approach that I took one time, is just starting there with her emotions and understand, acknowledging them, and then figuring out what are some things that we could do. Okay, 3-step counseling. I feel like I'm not as familiar with this one. Designed to promote positive practices. Oh, this sounds like ORS. By asking open-ended questions, reveal barriers or concerns, affirming and normalizing feelings, and sharing targeted information. Okay. Some of the components here to behavioral change, and we're moving on. We are moving on to the final step in the nutrition care process, which is monitoring and evaluation. Like I said, we normally group these two together, and this is where also I'm going to apologize for those who came to training last Thursday, because you saw this graphic show up all the time, and here it is again. And the reason that it's showing up is because I think it just does a really good job of showing how our assessment feeds into all of the other services that we provide to the participants, but also how important it is to make sure that we do an effective follow-up as well. Okay, so my other points here to mention about the monitoring evaluation is that it creates an ongoing process, right? So like if somebody comes in for their certification appointment today, they're going to get that continuity of care later on. Like we're not just going to say, here's some goals, here's some food, and we're going to start all over when we see you again at 6 months for your mid-certification visit. Like that's not going to happen. Okay, so it creates this ongoing process, and that's also going to be why we're going to talk about how important doing good TGIF notes are in a little bit. I also want you guys to know too that a lot of you have local agency guidelines already in place. A lot of time, if it's somebody that's high risk, the process is to refer to the CPA and let the CPA determine the sort of follow-up that needs to occur. And that's just one example, but there's lots of others, right? Like we have mothers who have breastfeeding concerns. Some mothers just want to do more frequent height and weight checks on their kids. And so they may actually ask to come back into the clinic in a couple of months. And so, I don't know, I'm just throwing some different things out there, but it just needs to be, again, sort of a fluid process and, with guidelines in place, but also too, it's where that assessment and your professional judgment also comes into place in doing effective monitoring and evaluation. And here's my plug again for referrals, but we're going to cover that in future slides. Okay. All right. All of this to say the nutrition care process, the assessment, diagnosis, intervention, monitoring, evaluation, with a VINA approach in mind, because that's what we use, there are 6 main core competencies that go into it. And so my thought is in the coming year, during our CPPA calls, we'll probably spend some time going through each of these competencies and how we can improve our skills, our competency in them. It includes principles of life nutrition, so just knowing sort of the basics of nutrition, nutritional concerns for the categories that we serve. Learning more about the VINA approach. How many times have I said this? Participant-centered and health outcome-based. I will tell you now that the VINA guidance that we have is a long document. So even though there's only a couple of slides here, there's still a lot that has not yet been covered. So we can talk more about the VINA approach, data collection techniques, critical thinking skills, how to build our competency in multicultural intelligence and awareness, and also how to build competency in our communication styles. So more to come on that, probably within the upcoming year, but just to be mindful of it up front, that really all of this plays into being an effective nutritionist, nutrition counselor, and doing your nutrition assessment. All right. Let me pause real quick. I don't know if there's questions or anything that have come into the chat. There have not. Okay. And I don't know if I invited you guys to do this earlier on, but please feel free to stop me and ask questions or clarify something as I go. Okay. So with that, we're going to move on to our next step. So we finished off the nutrition care process, and now we're going to talk about documentation. And actually, this is a great time to pause because I've got a question on this screen, which is, what is the point? But actually, I think the better way to say this is, what is the value of doing our TGIF notes? So you guys let me know what you think. No, nobody wants to talk. Okay. What is the value in doing a TGIF note? Here's the point that I'm really trying to drive home when it comes to these notes and the reasons why we write them. One, that it's a requirement. We know that, right? That's easy. But the whole point of the note is that it's able to capture those parts of counseling and the assessment that it's not going to show up anywhere else in hands. You're not going to see it on their medical tab. You're not going to see it with them today. Make little notes of it. Go back and I read the other parts in the note. Okay, those are TGIF notes. I feel like I have to, because we're talking about TGIF notes. Very important that they get done on the same day as the appointments, as the certifications, mid-certifications, CPA follow-ups, even though I'm talking to a CPPA group. That's per policy. It's the way that the HAND system is set up. So just be very mindful of that. Try to get them done. And with time and with experience, they shouldn't take a long time to create. As we get better at these and more efficient, 3 to 5 minutes to really crank out a TGIF note. Sorry, and I have one more thing to say too. The TGIF note, because I think of it as sort of a place to capture information that can't be found elsewhere in HANDS, you know, some notes can be very long and may not always need to recapture information that can be found elsewhere. You know, if we're talking about growth trends or risk codes or something, but there is also a time and place to put them in the TGIF note if you're trying to capture some of these other things too. You know, their knowledge gaps ready to change or things like that. So anyways, more to be said at a later time on these notes. Okay. Okay, food packages. So we're moving right along then. We're going to talk a little bit here about food packages, slightly different from what was covered at new employee training last week. And for those who are coming in September, that's going to be covered at that time. What I want us to know today about food packages is that there's 7 federal food packages, which means they're going to look the same for all WIC programs, no matter where you go, and kind of no matter, like, based on the participant category. Like, all pregnant women are going to be issued the same foods, regardless of where they receive WIC. All the WIC foods that are groups or groups, I guess, they have nutritional standards. Think about all the milks that we approve, all the cheeses, all of the beans and peanut butters and things like that. Like all of these different food items and food groups, there's nutritional standards that they have to meet before they can be approved in the WIC program. The milk in a default food package for lactose-free milk or soy milk, or you might, you know, you can take off the cheese or you can take off yogurt or whatever, but it's very limited. It does not have all the milks that we authorize, and even US CPPAs are allowed to issue in that food package. So the other important thing here about the default food package is that you're not going to find any items in there that require a prescription or a CPPA approval. CPA approval, excuse me. Okay. So default food packages do not always meet our participants' needs or preferences, and so that's where it's going to be helpful to move on over to the tailoring food package. Tailoring food package has many more tailoring options. Basically, we allow just about everything that can be authorized without a CPA prescription or without a prescription. There are some items that require CPA approval, specifically the 2% milks for our children and our women categories. But I think other than that, everything is okay for you guys, the CPPAs, to go ahead and issue. So another change, though, when you move from the default food packages to tailoring, is that it no longer just blankets gives that cheese and gives that yogurt. It defaults to giving all milk, which means if the participant wants cheese, they want yogurt, they want tofu, you got to sub it back in. So you got to reduce the amount of milk that they're issued in order to put those other items on. And I already am ahead of myself. So this is where I said here that there are some items in the tailoring food package that do require CPA approval, and that includes those 2% milks. But I think that's it. So great if the participant wants to mix and match milks and add and take off cheese and tofu and all that other stuff. But I think for the most part, we're going to stick with our default package. The special with formula really should be the ones that CPAs are touching, but we'll talk about it a little bit here. The special with formula food package includes all tailoring options under the sun. Basically, it has just about the same as tailoring, but it also includes those whole fat milks for children categories like your C2, C3, C4, and all of your woman categories too. This one also defaults to giving all milk. So again, you got to substitute back in those cheese, those yogurts, and those tofu. And here it's the only food package that includes exempt infant formula and WIC eligible nutritionals, which are probably terms more familiar with our CPAs since they're the ones that are going to give these out. But basically, exempt formulas are all other formulas that we're able to provide outside of our contract ones, our Similac Sensitive, Similac Isomil, Soy Isomil, and Similac Advanced. So again, I think for simplicity's sake, I think it's best to just stick with default or tailoring food packages. And if a participant comes in and they have a prescription in hand, it's where it's appropriate to hand it off to the CPA and for them to go ahead and issue with a special with formula food package. Okay. Here's my table. Here's my chart of do's and don'ts for food packages. Okay, yes to issuing, this for you guys, for CPPAs, yes for default, yes for tailoring, and yes for preferences. If somebody wants soy milk and they want buttermilk and they want lactose-free milk, like you can give them all three, okay? Like go ahead and do that. Do it in a tailoring food package. Give them their cheese, yogurt, tofu milks. We have the flexibility and the ability to do all of that in hands. You also are able to, and again, this is going to kind of come back to in the cases of participant preference, issue less than the MMA, maximum monthly allowance. So if they don't want eggs because nobody at home eats eggs, or they don't want milk, like you can substitute those off because the participant doesn't want them. That's within your scope, and that's totally fine to do. And a note down here too, you guys are authorized to do those formula substitutions. Okay, through October 31st. So I'm not talking about special formulas. I'm not talking about like babies who are preterm and they need like higher infant calorie formulas, or you know, they've got milk allergies and they need those sort of things. Like those are going to require prescriptions. But because of the national formula shortage, if they can't find Similac sensitive, but they can find Enfamil sensitive, they can't find Similac Advanced, which should not be the case anymore, but they can only find Enfamil Infant, right? Like you guys are allowed to go ahead and make that change for them. Only through the end of October 31st, but as we started off this call, we are gently pushing our people back onto Similac because inevitably they're going to have to go back to Similac at some point. So anyways, but that is mentioned here, so I'm going to mention it now. And then my no's for food packages, again, are sort of those special with formula issuance food packages. I'm not going to mention that. Just don't use the special with formula food package. Exempt formulas, these are ones that require prescription. No, we're not going to do those. 2% milks, again, it's going to require CPA approval anyway, so let's not do that. And reduced fat milks to AC1 with an asterisk, and the reason why there's an asterisk there is because you can give soy milk to C1s, and that does not require a prescription, and it technically is a reduced fat milk. But what I'm talking about here is that normally 1-year-olds need to take whole fat milk. We're not going to give them 1%. Okay. And then no to food allergens. What was I trying to say here? And I said refer to a CPA. I might need to go and clarify myself in my own thoughts, but I'm thinking if like somebody tells you that they have an egg allergy and we're giving them eggs, we don't want to do that. And the reason being is that, again, WIC foods are intended for WIC participants. It's not intended for other family members or friends or cousins, not to trade and not to sell. So if we know that like a participant in front of us has an allergy to eggs, we really shouldn't be like issuing it to them. I think that was the point I was trying to make. Okay. All right, we need to move this along. We're in our last section. So breastfeeding and WIC. This is how we're going to wrap up today's call. So what is your role as a CPPA? All levels of staff in the WIC clinic, there's like no wrong person to talk to. You're going to have training in breastfeeding. You're going to know how to have that basic conversation with a mom. Okay, so you do, to an extent, you do breastfeeding counseling, and there's specific risk codes that are designated just for those of breastfeeding status. Okay, so we need to feel comfortable with mom who's talking to us and there's some sort of breastfeeding concerns, that we know how to give basic communication, like basic nutrition counseling around that. And then of course, being able to refer up and to whoever else we need to make sure mom feels supported in that journey. Your other role in breastfeeding and WIC is to make sure that we are issuing food packages that promote breastfeeding. And I'm going to ask them questions on the next couple of slides here to kind of test their knowledge on that. But what I'm trying to get at is if mom is only breastfeeding or is only giving formula like a couple times a day, that we give her a food package that reflects that. And we're just not automatically issuing like the maximum amount, because I know I just said that we default to issuing the maximum amount, but this is an exception here. We really want to, again, we're going to tailor that food package to promote the breastfeeding and just match the amount of formula that she's currently giving. Also, your role too is to just be knowledgeable about our different breastfeeding resources and when to make the appropriate referrals. My referral slide is coming up in a little bit. I keep saying it's coming, and it really is. But this is really, I know you guys have been a quiet crowd today, but there's no wrong answers here. I just want on these next couple of slides to see where we're at, and you guys give me some of your answers and responses on what you would do. Okay, this is my pop quiz. So if a mom comes to you and she's certifying her 1-week-old baby and she's exclusively breastfeeding, and she tells you that this baby feeds every 4 hours, she wants to know if this is enough. What do you say to her?
No, that's not enough.
I love it. Okay. But why? Why is it not enough? Mhm.
It's not enough because babies are supposed to feed on demand. So especially around that age, like we're supposed to be focusing on like hunger and feeding cues versus like the time frame specifically.
Mm. I like it. Any other thoughts? How
Breastfed
so?
babies, they have a different feeding schedule versus formula fed babies, so they feed more frequently. So mom should be looking out for those cues
Mhm.
and then just refer her to the peer counselor.
Mhm. Anybody else? And if not, I'm going to share some of my thoughts. Thank you guys. Actually, one more question. She's saying she's feeding every 4 hours, and we're saying no, that's not enough. What is enough? Like, what would be a target frame for her to try to get to?
At least every 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours. But I mean, I would just say, your baby. You'll know the signs like when they're hungry, when they're not. So I I don't know. I don't know. It always depends. Like if they're already have kids that are breastfed versus the first baby. So
Very true. Very, very true. As somebody who has 2 little babies, I breastfed both of them. Very different in breastfeeding journeys. I wanted to throw this out here because hasn't this happened to you guys where mom says that baby's feeding every 4 hours, but then she throws in some other stuff. Oh, except at nighttime, this baby wakes up every hour and a half. Or in the morning, they feed at 7 and they feed at 9, but then after that, it's every 4 hours. So I bring that up because sometimes they throw out a number right there, and going back to our VNet approach where we collect information, but we also have to clarify and synthesize that information. Sometimes when I get just like numbers like this, I'm like, actually, let's talk about that a little bit more. Thank you guys. That was great. I like the responses. And something else too, for this 1-week-old baby, it is normal for them to dip in their birth weight, and it can take up to 2 weeks to get back up to their birth weight. But we definitely would want to look at their weight compared to what their birth weight was and figure out how, where is mom in that baby, and trying to get back up to that birth weight if they have not yet already done so. I have more. So here's another scenario. Mom is partially breastfeeding and giving some formula. And this baby is diagnosed with jaundice, and she wants to stop breastfeeding until jaundice is cleared up. What do we say?
There's two types of jaundices, so I think we should defer to the CPA. But I do know with jaundice, they say to keep feeding because one of the types, if they are able to poop and get that out, it's good for them.
Thanks, Emerald. Anybody else have thoughts? Cool. Couple of things here. Again, this is just us being nutrition counselors and thinking about some things that we should ask them about. Specifically, I put jaundice on here because I believe it is a low risk condition. So you might get babies that come in and they've been discharged from the hospital and they have jaundice. Okay. So usually if you're seeing them in clinic, it's not like as severe of a level, because if those bilirubin levels are too high, they're probably going to keep them admitted until they come down a bit and it's safe for that baby to go home. So if you've got a mommy who comes in and that baby's got jaundice and we're still waiting for it to get cleared up, I'm going to be honest, I've seen both recommendations. For some whatever reason, I have heard doctors say not to breastfeed, but like we promote breastfeeding. So if that is a recommendation from the doctor, then we're going to recommend pump and dump, or something. Like we need to stimulate those breasts to keep up with that milk supply because this is a little baby. Jaundice only happens in those first couple of weeks. As a newborn. So and that's a critical time for mom building up her milk supply. But if it has not been specifically recommended for her not to breastfeed, then Emerald, you already said it, we're going to recommend that she do so. There's so much good stuff in that breast milk, and I don't know, I need to learn more about it, but it's generally safe to continue breastfeeding for those babies that have jaundice. And again, there's just too much good stuff that goes into it. So we're going to recommend it unless a doctor has said no. Doctor says no, then we're going to figure out ways for mom to maintain and build up that milk supply until it is safe to continue breastfeeding. Okay, I promise, last one for a little bit. Mom is breastfeeding and she gives 6 ounces of formula a day. And they're doing great. And mom wants 3 cans of formula today. So what do you do? Okay, here's a better question. Do we know, like, if mom's giving 6 ounces of formula, like, how many cans of formula typically we would give to meet that amount that she's doing daily? I should have started with that question.
No, I'm not
Oh,
sure.
okay. That would be some helpful background information. Generally, please, anybody correct me if I'm wrong, for every 3 ounces of formula that mom gives in a 24-hour period, we would issue 1 can of formula. So if she's doing 6 ounces in a whole day, then we're thinking like 2 cans of formula. Okay. So with that though, so mom's asking for more formula than what she's currently giving. So I don't know, what's your next steps? Like, what would y'all recommend? In interest of time, I'll speak. So what would I say? I'd be like, Mommy, why you want so much formula? And then I would just figure out, like, is she stressed? Is she going back to work? Is she dropping the baby off at daycare? Does she plan for her to start giving more formula? Maybe she doesn't know. Maybe she's just like, well, they gave me 3 cans from the hospital, and I don't know, somebody told me I could get that much at WIC, so that's how much I want. Or I know you guys have heard this. My friend got this many cans, and I want this many cans, even though I'm not giving my baby that much formula. But of course, we want to be breastfeeding centric, so we're going to promote mom, and we're going to encourage her in her breastfeeding journey to try to step back from as much formula as possible and do more of the breastfeeding, especially if we got a young baby here. Right, but ultimately we meet our mommies where they're at, so we do need to come to some sort of consensus on like what she's going to receive in her food package, benefits, and just because she told us that she's giving 6 ounces, I don't know, if she's requesting 3 cans, it's not going to be that big of a fight. Like ultimately at the end of the day, you know, we're trying to take care of mom, we're trying to take care of the baby. I wouldn't fuss it too much. I would just, if after the education she still wants those 3 cans, I would probably just give it to her. All right, guys, we're almost done. Referrals. So I keep talking about referrals. I just want to break them up into our 2 categories. In-house referrals, it's my picture over here on the left. Your in-house referrals are your other WIC staff team members. So depending on their nutrition risk and their needs, you could refer them to CPAs, dietitians, or licensed nutritionists. And if they have breastfeeding concerns, you can refer them to your designated breastfeeding expert in your local agency. CLCs, if you have those, certified lactation consultants, or IBCLCs. Pacify, breastfeeding peer counselors are also good steps in the right direction for support, but that's sort of your list of your in-house referrals. And we got outside referrals that we make too. And again, this just comes into your skills of completing nutrition assessment and being able to identify needs for the participants. These are just examples here. You might refer them for immunizations, lead screening, if they haven't done that, substance use for our women in the program, adjunct eligibility programs, right? So if they qualify for WIC, they might qualify for other assistance programs, SNAP, TANF, National School Lunch Program if they have older children. And a lot of times we just refer back to their doctor, back to their healthcare provider for whatever needs that they may have. So future training is coming on referrals. So this is just me kind of doing it as an overview, and we're on to the next slide. Okay, I want to trust this because, I want to highlight this. This is our trusted resources because again, I think one of the core competencies of VINA is just being able to, it's principles of nutrition, but it's also just being able to know like where we draw our messaging from here in the WIC program. So first I've got our logo up here. So any materials that we send out, like on dcwic.org, or any materials that we create, like you can trust those. Those are good to use. Those are good to share and reference with participants. Some other WIC websites, wicworks.fns.usda.gov has lots of material. Different resources for you guys to go and to learn more about different components of WIC. WIC also has a breastfeeding website, so that's wicbreastfeeding.fns.usda.gov. Some other things here too. I'm going to go back up to the top. Dietary guidelines for Americans, which feeds into My Plate. Like those two are best friends. They hold hands. So definitely anything that you see on DGA or if you see on My Plate, those are going to be messages that we recommend here in WIC. Some other places too. where we get a lot of our information and research would be like the American Academy of Pediatrics. I want us to think of within the last couple of years, they moved the recommendation of introducing those common allergen foods early on in the diet. That started with a change in recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics. It trickles down, and now that's a message that we get to our WIC participants. Center for Disease Control has so many different links and websites and things that I go and reference when I prepare a lot of these trainings and calls, so they're a great place to go for information. And then National Institutes of Health has so many websites that I like. I usually highlight a resource that I didn't because I'm doing CPPA training, but their Office of Dietary Supplements breaks down each nutrient, like all the nutrients, and it goes through research and recommendations and food groups and things like that. And for whatever reason, I love going there and looking at that. And that's an NIH website. Okay, I might include that in a follow-up email after this call. We're almost done. So remember, how many times have I talked about this? I just need somebody other than me to say it. What are the two main components of the VINA approach? There's two. If I give you one, someone has to give me the other one. It's participant-centered. Okay, it is participant-centered and it's health outcome-based. This question is going to keep showing up until I make sure, on all my other calls and all my other trainings, until I make sure I hear it from everybody so that we know what VINA is. And I want us to end on this thought. You'll have to share it with me. But I want us to think about like what our goals are for the upcoming year. Like I said, this is our final call for the fiscal year 22. We're going to come up with a whole new training curriculum within the next couple of months. We need to plan out our next set of CPPA calls, which I'll also use those CPPA surveys to get y'all's feedback to figure out what direction we want to go. And so, I don't know. I always just think, I know we think of like New Year's as a time of like self-reflection. I like to think of the fiscal year as a time of self-reflection. So just think about maybe what your upcoming goals are as we head into the fall and the upcoming months. And so I end with thank you. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you guys. And if not, thank you for coming to my short, abbreviated CPPA training. I hope you guys feel a little bit more equipped in some of your responsibilities, or even just in some of the background on how we get to do nutrition assessment. As always, I'll send out a link to this recording for those who couldn't attend today. And